From the Alvin and Rosalie Sarachek studio, PBS Kansas presents Kansas Week.
Is it time to put limits on what property police can seize and keep when investigating a crime? Plus, in the wake of a child's horrific death, is it time to open the record books at DCF in at least some cases? But first, a deadly shooting interrupts a major celebration, once again raising questions about the growing violence in our nation and the role guns play in it. That's what we're talking about right now on Kansas Week. It's a tragedy that has shocked the nation. A mass shooting just as hundreds of fans were about to leave the Chiefs rally. Nearly 24 victims, more than half of them children. One adult has died from her injuries.
I got a gunshot wound victim. He's got a gunshot wound to his neck. We're at Pershing and Kessler, just west, just before Broadway. We're on the north side of the street.
We have 9 gunshot wounds to the left. All other gunshot wounds due to report to DMAC East. All other gunshot wounds.
He was reporting more shots possibly fired in Union Station.
A day of celebration turning to chaos in a matter of seconds. Roughly 800 members of law enforcement were present, all rushing to the scene as police snipers scanned the crowd from rooftops.
I want everybody you got over here.
Police now saying this scene started as a fight among several people that ended with gunfire. But that's all it was.
Preliminary investigative findings have shown there was no nexus to terrorism or homegrown violent extremism. This appeared to be a dispute between several people that ended in gunfire.
Police say they took 3 people into custody, 2 of them minors. Investigators are working with local prosecutors on charges, but Thursday afternoon, police did release the adult. Also minors, more than half of the victims, who range in age from 6 to 47. In total, 22 people injured, most shot, a few with what doctors are calling incidental wounds. One person has died, Lisa Lopez Galavan, a local DJ and mother of 2. The fact no more people died, doctors say, came down to regular practice training for mass casualty incidents and a little bit of luck.
The thing that makes us special is the medical director of KC Fire is also an emergency medicine physician here. She was at the scene and was able to triage these patients appropriately, very quickly and efficiently, which ultimately allowed the sickest people to get to us first.
And joining us this week to tackle this emotionally difficult topic and others, we've got Democratic State Representative Vic Miller from Topeka, Dion Leffler, the opinion editor of the Wichita Eagle, and former Republican State Representative Jim Howell. Thank you all so much for being here. This is a very difficult topic. Almost immediately, within an hour or so of the shooting happening, we started hearing from political leaders, many of them simply with the thoughts and prayers level. Obviously, this is something that a lot of people feel hopeless about, but many others also almost immediately bringing up the gun rights and gun regulations issues that this nation has struggled with, this state has struggled with for a long time. And I know, Diane, you wrote a very acerbic opinion piece on this issue.
Yes, I did. I think that we have 2 problems. One is that the proliferation of firearms, and the other is that we are so polarized and so we're mad at the wrong people, and we are afraid of the wrong things. And I have been an advocate for common sense gun control in this state for a long time. That puts me at odds with Jim, who wrote those laws. But we need to do something. The one thing today I am thanking God for is that my son wasn't hurt in this. He was in that crowd. He's a lawyer in Kansas City, and his office is just up the street, about a block. So he went back in early because he couldn't hear the speakers. And but he was watching from his office window as the crowd scattered and people ran every which way, trying to get away from this shooting. So thank God he's okay.
And I think that feeling right there is why so many Kansans right now are struggling with this entire incident. Some million people were expected at that parade and rally. If you weren't there, you know somebody who was. I know several state lawmakers who were there.
Many of my friends were there. But for fortuitous events, I might have been there. I was there last year, and I almost was there this year, but many of my colleagues, many of them friends of mine, were there, and yesterday they were suffering. We had members that didn't come to work on Thursday because of how it impacted them or their children. I mean, that's one of the worst things about this event, is that there were so many kids, not only that were shot, but have to have been traumatized. Some of the stories I've heard are frightening. I've heard one story about a woman, this was the second time she's been involved in a shooting. One of my friends had his 2 young men there, and what he was talking about was how they responded exactly how they have been trained. That's kind of sickening, that we are training our children for just this kind of thing, and it actually occurs. I was amazed that the first reaction out of our Attorney General was more guns would have somehow addressed this issue. That a good guy, his words were, a good guy with a gun is what we needed, even though we had 800 great guys on duty that day. And to imagine that someone in the crowd, untrained, would have unloaded their gun in an effort to solve the situation is frightening, that we look at that, or some people are looking at that as a solution. No, we had plenty of good guys there, but as I couldn't have agreed with the comments earlier, I didn't see the opinion piece, but you're spot on, and the word I would use is proliferation. With the proliferation of guns in this country compared to every other place around the world, it's pretty clear what the problem is.
And certainly Missouri has very similar gun laws to Kansas, in the sense I believe it is a constitutional carry state, just as Kansas is, and the number of issues there, although Kansas City, Missouri does have some stricter rules in place locally. A very interesting situation as we're trying to look at it from this position. I know a lot of folks who are supporters of gun rights who do not want to talk about this issue right now. You agreed to join knowing that this was going to be a topic on the show.
Well, to Representative Miller's point, that was about one officer for every 1,000 people in attendance. When you have 1 million people together, I would call that a very tempting audience for people who are trying to make a scene. I'm not sure that's what happened in this case. It seems to me that someone had a conflict that happened in the spur of the moment. And so this gets back to a whole other issue. There's a lack of respect for the sanctity of life. There's a lack of morality being taught by our children, or to our children. There's a willingness to commit violence without any regard to consequences of what that violence will do. Was this a consequence of bad gun laws, or is it a consequence of a lot of other things? The fact that so many children were injured, we haven't learned the stories just yet, but I have a feeling that some of these people knew each other, and it was an act of violence towards someone specific. It wasn't just random shooting into the crowd. It was someone they saw.
I get all that, and I didn't speak whatsoever about the laws. What I said was, how would it have helped the situation to have more guns involved?
I'm with you. And in the end of the day, again, we do have a wonderful Constitution that lays this out for a reason. I probably would not have wanted to be down there without any type of personal protection. I don't feel safe. And I think I have a right to do that. If I want to take my responsibility on myself, because I know the police are not going to be there to protect me when something goes down, I have to take that responsibility myself, or I'm not going to go.
Right, and one of the reasons you don't feel safe is because you know it's quite likely there are people walking around with guns.
So let's talk about, I was just thinking about some other incidents that happened, big news. It was about 2 years ago. We had a parade, a Christmas parade, where someone did a horrible thing and plowed into the crowd. They killed 6 adults and injured 62 other people. It was 7 years ago in Nice, France. They were celebrating, I think, Bastille Day. And if I wrote this down, 86 people died because a huge truck plowed into the crowd. And they injured 434 people. And France is basically a gun-free state, a gun-free nation. So the idea that somehow, less gun laws or better gun laws or more strict laws is going to stop human violence against other humans is actually not true. There's examples all over the world that are nonstop. Now, there's also plenty of examples where a good guy with a gun does stop a bad act by someone who's doing the wrong thing. That happens all the time. In fact, in this very case, we had good people stood up and tackled the bad guys that were doing these horrible things.
Without the use of gun.
Well, that's true. And that, we call them heroes, don't we?
They were.
Even back to 9/11, didn't have any guns involved, but they used a razor blade and they able to take out 3,000 American lives. And guess what? The one hero, the heroes in this case were on Flight 93. They stood up and actually decided to fight back. And that's the mentality we're going to have in this country. But the idea that somehow the gun laws were a problem, the liberal political reaction, in my opinion, is predictable. It doesn't necessarily make a country any safer. In fact, in my opinion, my personal opinion, by doing a lot of study on this, it actually makes things worse.
Yeah, and again, you didn't hear me say we needed to change the law. One thing that I don't like every time we have an incident is knee-jerk reactions from everybody. We don't study common sense solutions. We need, in the cold of day, not the hot environment when the incident happens, we need to, in the cold of the day, look at what makes sense. And there are a number of provisions that make a lot of sense that we refuse to look at as lawmakers. And that's what I would speak to, not a knee-jerk reaction from anyone just because the event unfolded. But I will return to my point. If it was not for the proliferation of guns, we would not have the proliferation of mass shootings.
I'm going to disagree with you there just a little bit because the statistics show that for every car that plows into somebody, or for every other way that this happens, there's a dozen mass shootings. The problem is there's no cold time. There is never a time when we haven't just had one anymore. And they repealed the assault weapons ban from 1994. Gun violence, gun death has gone up. Passed the constitutional carry, and gun deaths have gone up. And it's not that hard to see what the problem is. I'm a gun guy. I have guns. I used to be a competitive shooter. And I quit the NRA the same day that President Bush did, and for the same reason. When I received the letter in the mail about the jackbooted Nazi thugs that were taking, that I got that letter 2 days after the Oklahoma City bombing. And so I quit the same day President Bush did. And the problem is twofold. One, there's too many guns, and two, there's too much dissent and distress that's going on in our society right now. And if we don't solve those two things, we're in trouble.
And I'm going to end the conversation there. We could literally take the entire half hour on this topic. I know that. I know all of you have much more you'd like to say, but there are other things that have happened. And that's one of the issues that happens when we get big incidents like this, is other things that are going on that need to be discussed, oftentimes get overlooked, don't get covered in the news because we're so concentrating on this. One of those, the death of 5-year-old Zoe Felix. You may remember that case. It's prompted a push to change reporting policies for the Kansas Department of Children and Families. Kansas lawmakers are taking up a proposal that department heads say would help them release information to the public faster. Rebecca Chung with the KSN Capitol Bureau explains.
Yeah, I was listening in on today's hearing here at the State House. Now, this is a bill that could have helped get more information out about Felix's case sooner. And this is something that state officials received pushback about last year. Now, the Secretary for Kansas DCF is urging lawmakers to take action on the bill. You can see her right there speaking in committee today. The agency introduced this plan to help speed up releasing information to the public. Keep in mind, this was an issue in Zoe Felix's case. The 5-year-old was raped and murdered, and there were many questions surrounding her death. But we had to wait to get answers from DCF because of current current state law. The law requires a finding of abuse or neglect before a summary report can be released. Now, DCF says that can take a while, especially when there's an ongoing investigation. This bill would allow the agency to release information if criminal charges were filed in a case.
You know, child fatalities are serious incidents that we all must grapple with. Communities grapple with the impact of that. And I think it's important that there be access to appropriate information, really as a matter of public trust.
Now, this is an additional requirement that would be added to release information in child death cases. Right now, the bill is in the Child Welfare Committee on the House side. As for the next steps, lawmakers will have to work the bill, then decide whether to send it to the floor for a vote. For now, reporting at the Capitol, I'm Rebecca Chung.
And Diane, you and I have covered I don't know how many cases like the Zoe Felix, though perhaps not quite as gut-wrenching as her death. And you guys have been around and seen those headlines as well. There have been so many complaints time after time after time about difficulty getting information from DCF, difficulty moving forward. This seems to answer at least some of those.
I completely agree. In fact, my better half actually serves on that committee. We've talked about this. I think that there are times when we need to get the right information out. And unfortunately, I know these laws are intended to protect children and protect sensitive information, but if you can't get the information out about a case to understand what happened, it's hard to talk about it. It's hard to know what to do differently. And this is one of those things where I think that this is a very reasonable exception, that we would allow the right information to get out to the right people so those conversations can happen.
Yeah, I think we need to be clear. The department caught a lot of flack for not releasing the information. They were actually prevented by law from doing so, and as you see, the secretary is the one that is pushing for the opportunity to release the information. They were unfairly blamed for the holdup. This case rings particularly true to me because it happened in my district, and it is a tragedy.
And there's so many issues that go into these cases, Diane. You and I, unfortunately, have covered too many of them over the years.
Yeah. Well, and it's just this. It's funny. It's like the wall always moves. You try to get some information, and we can't give you that because, and then for a very long time, even state lawmakers have not been able to get adequate information on these cases. And so if the state lawmakers can't get it, they can't improve the system. If they, it's just this whole weird withholding thing, and no matter where you go, it's like, well, we can't release that because of law. Well, okay, the lawmakers, well, we can't release that to them either, and it just puzzles me that we have. I've worked in other states.
Well,
and
the problem is people are too quick to point the finger instead of look for the answer. And I hear this from lawmakers. They say, why didn't the agency do this or that, when in fact it was the lawmaker that prevented them from doing it, which again, you see the secretary is the one coming forward and saying, if you want transparency, allow transparency.
But it hasn't always been so.
It's often
I've been here for 20.
It's often the case.
I've covered this stuff over 20 years.
I am an advocate for transparency. I get aggravated every time I see law enforcement say we can't release the video that we have of the crime for this reason or that reason. Many times it's not the law. Sometimes it is the agency choice. I'm simply saying that the lawmakers can fix the law almost any time they want to.
Well, Kansas has the weakest open records law that I've ever seen. It consists of a statement at the beginning saying records shall be open, and then page after page of exceptions that can be stretched to fit any occasion.
You're preaching to the choir.
Jim, you had some thoughts on this?
I just wanted to say this is House Bill 2628, and to your point, Representative Miller, this does clean this up. It makes it crystal clear what they can do. Right now, these agency leaders, I don't think they're trying to be obtuse or difficult. I think that frankly they're not absolutely certain they should release something, and they don't want to make a mistake. So I appreciate they're trying to be very careful, but what this bill does, it makes it crystal clear when they can release this information, so that there's no accusations later on that they made a mistake.
Right, and I've heard no one say that the secretary was wrong in terms of how she responded to this incident. She is right in terms of the change that she needs.
Right.
All right. Well, Kansas law enforcement and an unusual coalition clashed this week at the State House on bills that would limit how much personal property and money police departments can seize from suspected criminals. The Kansas Reflector reports Kansas Chief Deputy Attorney General Daniel Burrows defended a hard-fought attempt to overhaul the state's civil asset forfeiture law and urged rival factions to avoid the temptation to march to their castles, close the drawbridges, and shoot arrows at each other, rather than agree to support meaningful reform. He said Attorney General Chris Kobach, who oversees the Kansas Bureau of Investigation, as well as a team of state prosecutors, committed to a mission of protecting citizens' rights and the ideals of limited constitutional government. In that vein, he said the Attorney General had, over the last year, stopped thousands of dollars in unwarranted forfeiture claims from moving forward and maneuvered behind the scenes to develop a compromise acceptable to civil libertarians, defense attorneys, law enforcement agencies, prosecutors, and other interested parties. Similar bills introduced in the House and Senate would both remove the crime of drug possession from the list of offenses subject to forfeiture, require a judge to approve a probable cause affidavit before a forfeiture case could proceed, and allow defendants who recovered more than half of their property to also recoup attorney's fees and litigation costs. Kansas Justice Institute litigation director and general counsel Sam McRoberts said allowing law enforcement agencies the right to keep proceeds from forfeiture actions they initiated created a policing for profit system. In the guise of a war on drugs, he said, existing state law enabled law enforcement agencies to take profit from law-abiding citizens, not just criminal defendants. And Vic, you're on this committee. Civil asset forfeiture, for those who aren't closely following the State House and law enforcement issues, is kind of a confusing issue. So can you encapsulate that for us a little bit?
Well, first clarify, I'm not on the committee, but I happen to be the
you were at the meeting.
I was a substitute on the committee this week when we had a missing member, so I was fortunate to be involved in the discussion. We cannot let the discussion occur without me pointing out that a champion of reform in this area was the late Representative Gail Finney from here in Wichita. Yep. This was at the top of her list. Year after year she was in championing reform, and it looks like we're getting so close to doing it. What may have been missing from the story is there is a rare occurrence in today's politics that we have two diverse sides coming together and together recommending this set of reforms. It is a very, very tenuous agreement. Again, I was part of the process this week as we referred the bill out of committee. There were efforts to amend it. We were asked by almost every conferee, don't monkey with the agreement. There are still those that want to tinker with it, but hopefully the package will stay together. Again, great reforms as long as the package maintains the balance that's included. And again, you don't see that too often in Topeka, Washington, wherever, but we do have a very strong agreement between two completely diverse sides, the libertarians on one side, law enforcement on another, and let's hope the package that we put together that came out of committee will stay together and make it all the way through.
And there is another bill in the Senate that has slight differences to it, so there is some question of whether this is going to make it through.
I understand, again, Senate Bill 458 in the Senate, and I don't think that bill's gone anywhere, but it's sitting there, and then House Bill 2606, which you're talking about, I believe was passed out of the House committee, and so I believe that the floor will take that up here before next weekend. But the Highway Patrol seems to like the House version of that bill better. I'm not sure exactly what the difference is. I would just say I think there are also some conservative Republicans like myself who actually also love Gail Finney's position on this, and I worked with her on that when I was up in the State House. It comes back down to the point without a conviction, there's a law enforcement suspicion that this is illegal, goods, and we have a right to take them and essentially put these people on trial. And if we don't find to get to a conviction, we get to keep it anyway. And maybe it's a car, or maybe it's cash, or whatever it is. There's a belief this is stuff that is illegal and it was gotten through illegal means, and we have a right to take it. You put people on the defense, and if you love the Constitution and you think that that should only happen if there is a conviction, then you probably would support this bill as well. I don't know how it is that the Highway Patrol is actually going to support a bill that, frankly, I think Gail Finney and I, and it sounds like maybe you, Representative Miller, would all agree with.
So the Highway Patrol, the Attorney General, the KBI Director, again, very diverse entities coming together to compromise, and I think they've struck the right compromise. Hopefully the package will, and if you loved what Gail Finney proposed, you loved her even more.
That's right.
Yeah. And this is an issue that affects all Kansans to one extent or another.
Yeah, in fact, the most read story that I have done at the Wichita Eagle since we started counting them was a story about an asset forfeiture. One of the things that people don't realize is in asset forfeiture, you don't sue the individual, you sue the actual property. And so my headline on that story, the dog that had sniffed out the drugs was named Scooby. So the headline on the story was, when Scooby sniffed weed, Kansas sued a truck. The truck won because the guy got his truck back. But yeah, I mean, it's a great idea. We shouldn't be allowing people to, keep the ill-gotten gains of crime. But on the other hand, if somebody smoked marijuana in a car and it's a slap on the wrist violation, but we're taking somebody's $15,000 car and they can't go to work from there and those kinds of things. I mean, it's
Now you're reaching constitutional levels.
You got to reach. You got to have the right balance.
I think this Constitution says something about unfair search and seizure.
I've been familiar with this practice all the way back to my days as county commissioner, and it's not unusual when the goods are seized, the person is truly innocent, and and under the current system, when you're innocent, you have a very expensive process, almost impossible process, getting those goods back. And as commissioner, I also saw where the proceeds of the forfeiture were not properly used. The statement about the libertarian that talked about policing for profit, I witnessed that as a county commissioner.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you all so much for joining us this week. I hope you've enjoyed our discussion. We'd also like to thank our news partners at KSN News, Cake News, and the Wichita Eagle for sharing their materials with us. For now, stay safe and have a great week.